Chapter 4 The Jewish Revolts. The Maccabean revolt erupted in response to the aggressive Hellenization policies of the Seleucid ruler Antiochus IV Epiphanes. I didn't say that right. His reign, 175 to 164 BC, was marked by efforts to consolidate imperial control through cultural unification. Greek language, civic institutions, and religious practices were promoted as tools of political cohesion. In many parts of the empire, this process unfolded gradually and with local adaptation. In Judea, however, it became a flashpoint of crisis. Jerusalem had already experienced internal tensions between traditionalist Jews and those attracted to Greek customs. A gymnasium had been established in the city, and segments of priestly aristocracy sought closer alignment with Hellenistic culture when Antiochus intervened directly in Judean religious life around 167 BC. What had been an internal cultural struggle became an imperial confrontation. Circumcision was forbidden, Torah observance was suppressed, copies of the law were reportedly confiscated and destroyed. Most dramatically, the Jerusalem temple was rededicated to Zeus, and pagan sacrifice was introduced upon the altar. The crisis was not merely political domination. Judea had lived under foreign rule before, Babylonian Persia, and now Seleucid. What distinguished this moment was the perceived assault on covenant identity. Torah observance was not simply tradition, it was the visible sign of Israel's covenant with God. To abolish circumcision and altar worship was viewed as an attempt to erase Israel's sacred distinctiveness. The result began in the town of, I'm not going to say this right, Modin. There the priest Matthias and Hasmonean and the Hasmonean family was ordered to offer pagan sacrifice. When another Jew stepped forward to comply, Matthias killed both the royal official and the compliant worshipper. His act was both rebellion and declaration. Fidelity to the covenant would not yield to imperial command. He and his sons fled into Judean hills, gathering supporters committed to Torah observance. What began as a small band of registers soon developed into a wider insurgency. After Matthias, I must not call him Matthias if his name keeps showing up. After Matthias' death, leadership passed to his son Judas, later called Maccabeus, the Hammer. Judas proved an effective military strategist. Rather than engaging in covenantal battles, he relied on guerrilla tactics, ambushes, swift strikes, and strategic withdrawals across familiar terrain. Seleucid expeditions sent to suppress the uprising were repeatedly defeated. These victories galvanized support and demonstrated that the imperial power was not invincible. By 164 BC, Judas retook Jerusalem. The temple, having been defiled, was purified and rededicated. The restoration of sacrificial worship marked not only religious renewal, but national vindication. This rededication became commemorated in the annual feast of Hanukkah, celebrating the rediscovery of the covenant worship. The struggle continued after the temple's restoration. Judas died in battle in 160 BC, and leadership passed to his brother first, Jonathan Appius, these names, and later Simon Thassi, through a commemoration of military resistance and political negotiation. They navigated the institutional instability of the Seleucid Empire. Over time, Judea gained increasing autonomy. By 142 BC, under Simon's leadership, Judea achieved effective independence. Tribute to the Seleucid crown ceased, foreign garrisons were removed, and Simon was recognized as high priest and national leader. Thus began the Hasmonean dynasty, a priestly family transformed into a ruling house. What had begun as a revolt to defend covenant faithfulness now developed into a new political order. The movement that resisted foreign interference would soon face its own questions of legitimacy, priestly succession, and authority, issues that would shape the sectarian divisions of later Second Temple period. The success of the Maccabean revolt brought political freedom, but it also introduced a new, lasting controversy. The Hasmoneans, through priests, were from the line of Jehoiarib, rather than from the Zadokites line traditionally associated with the Jerusalem high priesthood. In earlier Israelite history, the high priesthood had been linked with the des- descendants of Zadok, who had served faithfully in the time of David and Solomon. For many Jews, priestly legitimacy was not merely a matter of appointment, but of lineage and covenant community. When Jonathan Apphaius accepted the high priesthood from Seleucid authority in the mid 2nd century BC, the move was politically advantageous but religiously sensitive. The office was conferred amid shifting imperial alliance rather than through clear hereditary succession. Rather than Simon Thassi, consolidated power was does that sound right? Consolidated power and was recognized not only as high priest but also a national leader. The Hasmonean family effectively united religious and political authority in a single house. Over time, this fusion intensified subsequent subsequent goodness subsequent there we go subsequent Hasmonean rulers expanded territorial control through military campaigns, annexing surrounding regions and sometimes compelling populations to adopt Jewish practices. Eventually, Hasmonean leaders assumed the title of king, most notably under Artabalus I and Alexander Janus, thereby combining kingship and high priesthood in one person. For some Jews, this consolidation of power represented national strength and divine blessing. For others, it signaled a dangerous departure from established covenant structures. What began as a movement to defend the law had evolved into a her- hereditary dynasty wielding both sword and sanctuary. The transformation was gradual but consequential. Politically, the political necessity blurred into religious authority. The very family that had resisted foreign imposition now exercised centralized control over temple administration, territorial expansion, and legal interpretation. This period appears to have intensified internal Jewish divisions. Later historical sources speak of distinct groups emerging during or shortly after Hasmonean era. Communities later known as Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes, while the precise origins of each group remain debated, their disagreements reflect tensions of this period. The issue of priestly legitimacy remains central. If the high priesthood had been assumed by a line outside the traditional Sadducite succession, then temple administration itself could be viewed as compromised. For those who held this conviction, withdrawal from temple leadership or the formation of alternative communities may have appeared as acts of fidelity rather than rebellion. Thus, the Hasmonean consolidation of power did not simply stabilize Judea, it redefined it. Independence from foreign rule was achieved, unity within the national within the yet unity within the nation proved more elusive. The political triumph of the Hasmoneans may have preserved Jewish autonomy, but it also cons- coincided with the crystallization of sectarian identities that would appear what the heck sectarian identities that would shape the leaders the religious goodness, let's try that again. But also coincide with the crystallization of sectarian identities that would shape the religious landscape of Judea for the next 2 centuries. Many scholars have proposed that certain figures described in the Dead Sea Scrolls reflect disputes rooted in the Hasmonean era. Among the most prominent figures in the sectarian writings are the teacher of righteousness, the wicked priest, and the man of lie. I try to say man of lies. I guess I can't really fix that now because I already published, so meh. These titles appear in a polemical and interpretive texts that portray a community in conflict not merely with foreign powers, but with other Jewish authorities. The wicked priest is frequently theorized to be a Hasmonean high priest. Some scholars have suggested Jonathan Appius as a candidate. Others have proposed different, earlier Hasmonean rulers. The basis for these identifications lies in the scroll's portrayal of a priestly figure who allegedly persecuted the teacher of righteousness, violated sacred norms, and exercised authority in a way the community deemed illegitimate. If the scroll if the scrolls emerged in the 2nd century BC, such descriptions could be read as reflecting disillusionment with Hasmonean leadership after it assumed control of the high priesthood. The teacher of righteousness, in turn, is often interpreted as a priestly reformer who opposed what he perceived as corrupt or unlawful temple administration. In the sectarian texts, he is presented as a divinely guided interpreter of the law, one who possessed insight into the correct understanding of Scripture and the proper observance of covenant obligations. His authority appears rooted not in political power but in revelatory insight and fidelity to what the community regarded as authentic tradition. The man of lie, or I think it should be man of lies, is commonly understood as the opposing teacher or rival interpreter who misled others through false exegesis or doctrinal distortion. The presence of such a figure suggests that the conflict was not purely institutional but also interpretive. Competing claims to the correct reading of Scripture and proper ordering of communal life seem to lie at the heart of the dispute. While these identifications remain debated and cannot be asserted with certainty, the thematic parallels are striking. The scrolls repeatedly stress strict covenant loyalty, rigorous standards of communal purity, and denigration of what they portray as a defiled priesthood. Such emphasis resonate with the tension that would naturally arise if a segment of the population believed the high priesthood had been assumed illegitimately, and the temple practice no longer conformed to the divine ordinance. To the concern over the concern over calendic. I had ChatGPT fix some things, and this is one of those chapters that I don't think I went over well to fix all the errors that would introduce. So I'm struggling here. The concerns over calendarical calendar calculations, we'll say. The concerns over calendar calculations is especially noteworthy if the temple authorities festival according fe, observed festivals according to one system, while a descendant group followed another. The division would not be symbolic; it would be enacted in time itself. Separate observance of Passover or of the Day of Atonement would embody separation from Jerusalem's leadership in the most concrete way possible. Thus, even if specific historical identifications can be formally established, the ideological landscape reflected in the scrolls aligned plausibly with the upheaval and sectarian fragmentation that followed the rise of Hasmonean dynasty. The Maccabean victory secured independence from foreign domination, but it may also have exposed fault lines within Judean society. The sectarian literature preserved among the scrolls can be read as the voice of a community that understood itself as preserving covenant fidelity in the midst of perceived institutional compromise. Whether these texts originated directly in the second century BC or reflect later reinterpretations of that crisis, the Hasmonean period provides a historically coherent backdrop for the conflicts and convictions articulated in the scrolls. The Jewish Roman War. By the first century AD, Judea existed under firm Roman control. Although Rome often allowed a degree of local autonomy, tensions simmered for decades. Heavy taxations, periodic corruption among governors, clashes over religious sensitivities, and growing presence of nationalist movements created a volatile atmosphere. Roman imperial symbols, census policies, and occasional provocations near the temple compounded resentment. Beneath the surface lay a profound question: could Israel remain faithful to its covenant identity under pagan imperial rule? In AD 66, tension erupted into open revolt. The immediate triggers included administrative abuse and disputes over temple funds, but the underlying causes were cumulative, and alongside rebel forces achieved early successes, including the defeat of the Roman 12th Legion. Rome authority was expelled from Jerusalem, and for a brief moment it appeared that Judea might secure independence once more. Rome, however, did not tolerate rebellion. General Vespasian was dispatched to suppress the uprising. He began his campaign in Galilee, methodologically subduing towns and fortresses. The Roman approach was disciplined and systematic, isolating centers of resistance and re-establishing control region by region. In AD 69, amid civil war in Rome, Vespasian was declared emperor. Command of Judean campaign was passed to his son Titus, who advanced toward Jerusalem. By the time Roman forces encircled the city in AD 70, Jerusalem was fractured. Initially, competing Jewish factions, often described as zealots, priestly elites, and various revolutionary leaders, struggled for control. Infighting weakened defense coordination, supplies dwindled, famine spread. Ancient accounts describe the siege as devastating, not only because of Roman pressure, but because of internal strife and desperation within the city walls. When the Romans firmly breached Jerusalem's defenses, the destruction was comprehensive. The temple, the architectural and theological center of Jewish life, was burned. Its treasures were carried away. Much of the city was dismantled. The symbolic heart of Second Temple Judaism was extinguished in fire and rubble. The destruction of the Second Temple marked a seismic transformation in Jewish religious life. Sectarial worship ceased, and temporarily but indefinitely. Yeah, let's try that again. Sacrificial worship ceased, not temporarily but indefinitely. The priesthood, whose authority had revolved around temple service, lost its institutional formation in the aftermath, surviving in the In the aftermath, surviving leadership reorganized Jewish life after around Torah studies, communal prayer, and interpretive tradition. What would later develop into Rabbinic Judaism began to take clearer shape in this period, redefining covenant fidelity apart from what in the world? Apart from sacrificial ritual. I feel like I misspoke that word a few times earlier. The war did not end immediately with Jerusalem's fall. Pockets of resistance persisted, most famously at Masada, a fortress overlooking the Dead Sea. There, Jewish rebels held out against Roman siege until AD 73, when the Romans finally entered the stronghold. They found the they found that the resistance had come to its tragic conclusion. Masada became a symbol of defiance, but also of finality. The last organized stand of the revolt had collapsed. The First Jewish-Roman War thus represents more than a failed rebellion. It marked the end of a temple-centered system that had defined Jewish religious life for centuries. The political landscape was shattered, the priestly order displaced, and the sacred geography of Jerusalem irrevocably altered. Any movement Any movement, text, or sectarian vision emerging from this period would inevitably be shaped by the trauma of AD 70 and the loss of the temple at its core. The traditional reconstruction proposes that the Dead Sea Scrolls were concealed in caves near Qumran as Roman forces advanced through Judea during the Jewish-Roman War. According to this view, members of the sectarian community, often identified with the Essenes, removed their library from their settlement and hid it in nearby caves protected from destruction. The geographic proximity of Qumran to Roman military routes along the Dead Sea and archaeological evidence of disruption in the region around this period have frequently been cited in support of this scenario. In this framework, the caves function as an emergency repositories. The concealment of texts would not have required elaborate ceremony, only urgency, available containers, and knowledge of the terrain. The Judean desert's dry climate, combined with the isolation of its caves, created conditions favorable for preservation. Thus, the hiding of the scrolls during a time of crisis fits a plausible wartime pattern. Thematically, several sectarian texts appear compatible with a period of upheaval and expectation. Writings that describe an imminent divine judgment, a climactic confrontation between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and condemnation of corrupt leadership in Jerusalem resonate with an atmosphere of escalating conflict. Such language can be read as apocalyptic anticipation intensified by Roman encroachment and internal Jewish divisions. In times of siege and instability, theological interpretation often sharpens. Historical crisis is framed as cosmic struggle At the same time, it is important to distinguish between composition and preservation. Even if certain texts originated decades earlier, perhaps during the Hasmonean period, they may still have been preserved and concealed during the revolt against Rome. The identical themes embedded in the scrolls could have been reread and reapplied to new circumstances. Apocalyptic expectations is not bound to a single moment, it can be renewed in successive crises. AD 70 therefore stands in a decisive historical anchor in any discussion of the scrolls. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple did not simply end a rebellion, it dismantled the central institution around which Jewish religious life had revolved. If the sectarian community defined itself in opposition to Jerusalem's priesthood, the temple's destruction would have altered its self-understanding profoundly. If it defined itself as a pure alternative to a corrupt sectarian, yeah, let's try that again. If it defined itself as a pure alternative to a corrupt sanctuary, the loss of the sanctuary would have reshaped the polemic. Any interpretation of the scrolls must reckon with the rupture, whether the texts reflect anticipation of divine intervention before AD 70 or preservation of efforts during the war itself. The catastrophic end of the temple's the catastrophic end of the temple-centered system forms an unavoidable historical horizon. The scrolls, whatever their precise date, exists in the shadow of that destruction. The Bar Kokhba revolt. Roughly 6 decades after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, Judea erupted once more in a large-scale revolt. The memory of the temple's fall remained fresh. The Roman authorities, though firmly established, had not distinguished national or religious aspirations. The reign of the Emperor Hadrian introduced new pressures. Jerusalem was refounded as a Roman colony named, oh goodness, Alii Capitolina, forget that name, competed with typical features of the Greco-Roman urban reign. The typical features of the Greco-Roman urban design. Reports that a pagan shrine would be erected on or near the former temple site intensified Jewish outrage. For many, this was not merely political humiliation, but a direct affront to sacred memory. The revolt that followed in AD 132 was organized, determined, and initially successful. Its leaders, Simon Bar Kokhba, emerged as a charismatic and forceful figure. Some prominent voices, including Rabbi Akiba, reportedly interpreted him in messianic terms. His very name, Son of the Star, invoked biblical imagery associated with deliverance and royal expectation. Under his leadership, rebel forces established fortified strongholds across Judea and gained control over significant territory. For a brief period, the revolt appeared to achieve what the early war had failed to secure: a restored Jewish administration. Coins were minted proclaiming the redemption or freedom of Israel, symbolically asserting sovereignty. Documents from the period demonstrate organized governance, supplying coordination and military discipline. The movement was not spontaneous uprising, but a structured attempt at national restoration. Rome responded with overwhelming force. The campaign was methodologically and relentless. Rather than rely solely on siege of a central city, Rome strategically targeted fortified villages and defensive networks across the countryside. The war was prolonged and brutal. Ancient accounts speak of widespread devastation, scorched settlements, and immense loss of life. The objective was not merely suppression, but eradication of resistance captivity. By AD 136, the revolt had been decisively crushed. The consequences were severe. Jewish presence in Jerusalem was drastically restricted, and access to the city was limited. The province itself was renamed Syria Palestina, an administrative change often interpreted as an attempt to diminish Jewish national identity in the region. The demographic and cultural impact of the revolt was profound, contributing to the further dispersal of Jewish population. The Bar Kokhba revolt thus marked the final large-scale Jewish attempt to overthrow Roman rule in antiquity. If the destruction of the temple in AD 70 shattered the sacrificial system, the failure of AD 136 extinguished immediate political hopes of restoration. The result was a decisive turning point. Jewish life would continue, but not as a sovereign temple-centered nation within Judea. The memory of of the memory of revolt remained, yet the strategy for survival shifted increasingly toward adaptation, textual preservation, and religious continuity beyond political control. That looks like the end of that chapter.